Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about a free 3-act worksheet to help you structure your story. Whether you're a plotter or a pantser, a novelist, or short fiction writer, this 3-act worksheet will help you navigate your material and even begin each new story with a better plan. Download yours at nancypanuccio.com/act. Stop getting stuck in the middle of your draft. Go grab this free worksheet, nancypanuccio.com/act. You've likely lost interest because the story has become too big and too flabby and hard for you to track. It's gone off course. Starting over doesn't solve that, because then the problem is just going to repeat over and over and over. I guarantee it. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has the story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. How do you know when it's time to set a story aside and start fresh? Let's say your current project feels unclear and far from what you originally envisioned. Would starting over with a new idea be the right move? Or would that just be avoiding the hard work? If you've ever asked yourself some version of that question, I want you to know two things. First, you're in very good company. This is one of the hardest questions writers face. It's also very common. A lot of writers identify as serial starters. They're great at beginnings. A new idea grabs them, the pages fly, then somewhere past that initial excitement, when the excitement wanes, the real work sets in, writing all the way through to the end. And when the story isn't showing up the way you originally envisioned it, that's when it gets easy to believe the story itself is the problem and that starting something new would solve it. Except most of the time, it doesn't. It's usually more of a structure problem, or there are too many balls in the air and the story loses focus and shape. And it's hard for you as the writer to navigate it. So in this episode, we'll look at 3 possible reasons why your story feels unclear and far from what you wanted. And I'll offer a different way forward for each. So let's talk about it. Reason 1, you don't know what your story is about. Not the plot. I mean, the main story question the plot revolves around. That story question is often murky or vague or abstract, and it's worth spending some time thinking about. At the heart of every story, there's a question that's pulling the characters and the reader forward. So, what is your story asking? What's that central question? And does your protagonist's journey exist to answer it? For example, in Ellen Hildebrand's novel, The Perfect Couple, the central story question from which all the plot events and the various characters are consumed with is, was Merritt's death an accident, a suicide, or a murder? And if it was a murder, who at the wedding party did it? In Anna Quindlen's novel, Black and Blue, the central story question is, will Franny and her son successfully evade her abusive husband, or will he find them and destroy their new life? In Lolita, it's, will Humbert succeed in permanently possessing and controlling Lolita, or will she inevitably escape his manipulation? And in the memoir Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Greeley, it's, can a person form a coherent, self-loving identity when society keeps rejecting their physical appearance? Now, if you can't name your central story question yet, that's not a sign to abandon the story. It's always good to be asking yourself as you write what that central story question is, so that everything you include is aligned and orbiting around that question. It gives your story focus and gives each character a stake in what happens. So here's how to get clear on this. Try naming your central question, even roughly. And don't worry if you don't have it. Sometimes it just takes time. If you keep probing your material with defining and refining the central story question as you go, you'll have a better chance at structuring your story around that focal point. Okay. The second reason you may want to start something new and abandon this story is that there's no real dramatic tension. It's just a pile of plot events. This feels different from a murky central story question. You might know exactly what your story is about, but scene after scene, nothing is pushing against anything. Things happen, and then more things happen, but nothing is colliding. The plot meanders because there's no tension, and there's no tension because nothing is in real conflict with what your character wants. Meandering isn't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. A want without an obstacle has nothing to push against, so the scenes drift instead of building upon one another. Real dramatic tension often comes from contrast, an external pursuit set against an internal struggle that complicates it. For example, in The Perfect Couple, the family wants the wedding and they want to sustain this image of the perfect couple. They want that to survive intact, but the investigation into Merritt's death keeps forcing out the secrets they've all been protecting. And everyone in the novel has a secret they're trying to protect. In Black and Blue, Franny wants safety and a new life for her and her son. But her husband's search for them is always a possibility. There's that specter of her husband looking for her and eventually finding her. And so she never feels safe. In Autobiography of a Face, Lucy Greeley's grueling, decades-long pursuit of reconstructive surgery runs against her internal struggle with alienation, bullying, and self-hatred. And that internal struggle is what makes the external pursuit dramatic instead of just procedural, instead of just plot. Notice the pattern. In every one of these, the want and the obstacle are locked together for the entire book. The surgeries alone would just be plot events. Merritt's death alone would just be a mystery. It's the want in conflict with something real that turns plot into tension. So here's how to get clear here. For every scene in your draft, name what your character wants in that moment, and then identify what's standing in the way of it. If you can't find an answer to that second part, you have found a specific, fixable weak spot. It's not a reason to scrap the book. This is fixable through revision, not abandonment. Okay, the third reason you might be dissatisfied with your work in progress is that you've lost interest in your own characters. Confusion about your central question, you can write your way through. A meandering plot you can restructure for tension and pacing, but losing your fascination for your characters is different. If they've started to feel shallow on the page or boring, that doesn't mean you should abandon the story. Just dig deeper. But here's what a lot of writers do. Writers who are disconnected from their characters tend to pile more onto them. More backstory, more quirky behavior, more situations, more stuff happening. It can look like progress because you're generating pages, but it usually has the opposite effect because the reader doesn't know where to focus. It's a sign you've lost the thread and you're trying to write your way back to it by adding stuff, when what you actually need is to subtract and go deeper. Here's why piling on more doesn't work, even though it feels like it should. Backstory and character quirks are facts about a character. They make a character documented, but not real, not dimensional. What actually makes a character feel rich on the page is duality. Two desires pulling in opposite directions at once. So the character can't fully get one without betraying the other. For example, Franny in Black and Blue. She doesn't want her husband back. That's not the pull, but he's not a stock villain to her either. She really loved him once, and that history doesn't erase itself just because she had to run away from him. What complicates her now, though, is harder to sit with than any lingering feelings she might have for him. She's given her son a new name, a new school, an entirely new life in Florida to keep him safe. And he's only 10, and he resents her for it. He misses his father. He doesn't want to be in Florida. That's the real guilt. She did this to him, even though she had to. And he's old enough to let her know it, that he's not happy about it. Underneath the guilt is something even more unsettled. Real self-doubt about whether she made the right call at all. And underneath that is the hardest part. She still doesn't feel safe, even with the new name and the new life and the new hairstyle and hair color. She's still watching. She's still bracing. So she has a son who is not happy, who resents her. She has doubt about her own choice and safety that really hasn't fully arrived. It's all sitting in the same body at once. Guilt, fear, self-doubt. That's what makes her feel real instead of simply righteous. Celeste in The Perfect Couple, she's marrying Benji to give her dying mother the peace of watching her get settled before she dies. And that's a real aching motivation. But as she gets closer to the wedding, that's not the whole truth of what she wants. She has real feelings for Shooter, the best man, feelings that she's shelved so she could marry Benji because that's what's expected. Marrying Benji secures her mother's peace of mind. It also means walking away from the one relationship that might actually be true for her. She can give her mother what she needs, or she can be honest with herself about who she loves. And as the wedding approaches, that unresolved tug between duty and desire is what makes her feel more than just the bride the mystery is built around. Now, none of these characters feel richer because we know more facts about them or more about their past. They feel richer because they want two things that conflict with one another. So how to get clear here? Stop piling on and go back to the original spark you had when you started writing this story, when you started writing about this character. The thing that made you want to write this story in the first place before you started worrying about whether the story was good enough, whether it was doing enough. Then ask yourself one simple question. What does my character want? not their backstory, not their personality quirks, just the one thing they want in this story. Once you have that, ask what else they want that conflicts with that, a second desire pulling in the opposite direction, and then ask where have you felt the same pull in your own life, even if the circumstances look nothing alike. The more of yourself you're willing to put into your characters, the less thin they'll feel, the more multi-dimensional they'll feel. Starting over is rarely the way to solve a story you've lost interest in. You've likely lost interest because the story has become too big and too flabby and hard for you to track. It's gone off course. Starting over doesn't solve that, because then the problem is just going to repeat over and over and over. I guarantee it. So here's what I want you to notice about all three of these areas where writers go off track, where they lose sight of their own story. None of them are answered by the question, is this story good or bad? That question is too broad to be useful, and it's the one most writers ask themselves when the story starts to feel stalled or like it's going off course and it's not the story they thought they were writing in the first place. And this is exactly why they start something new and the cycle repeats. Good or bad is not something you can diagnose. It's your judgment. A murky central question, a lack of real dramatic tension, and losing your connection to your characters, those are the questions that you need to focus on. And each one has a real findable next step. But most often, the way back to your story is just time. You've been staring at the same pages for months, and what feels like a structural problem is really just fatigue. If it's been a while since you took a real break from this draft, take one before you make any decision at all. Distance changes what you can see. You start to look at it the way a reader would. So a story that feels unsalvageable in week 14 can look completely different after 2 weeks away from it. Also, notice your own response to your reading your pages back. Are there parts where you're excited or moved as a reader? Pay attention to your own responses where the writing is moving you or exciting you, and what parts of the story you're losing attention. Was there a stretch of the draft where the pull was still there, and then a point where it wasn't, where you started to drift, where you started to get bored? Go back to the point where you felt pulled into the story and really think about why it's pulling you forward. That point is worth going back to, because there's probably some tension there where you're not getting fed all the answers, but you're anxious to know what happens next, or what the character is going to do next. So before you decide anything about starting over, ask yourself these 3 questions. Do you know your story's central question, even roughly? And does it still fascinate you enough to pursue it for the duration it takes to write the story? Is what your character wants in conflict with something, scene by scene? Or has that conflict gone flat somewhere along the way? And have you lost interest in your characters? Have you found yourself piling on stuff in the hopes of trying to make them more interesting instead of digging deeper? Are you trying to write what you think a successful book should look like instead of the story you actually set out to tell? Whatever you find, here's what I don't want you to do. Don't let, I don't know, I don't have the answers yet, turn into, I should quit. Almost every story that eventually works went through a stretch where the writer couldn't tell whether it was working, and it wasn't. They had to ask better questions. And often the answers are right in the story that you wrote. It's right in your rough draft. They may be buried, but all the clues are already there. So that stretch where you're unsure or your story feels like it's going off the rails and it's not what you thought it was going to be is not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're in the middle of figuring something out that hasn't come to fruition yet. You didn't lose the story. You just temporarily lost sight of it. And now you know exactly where to look. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.